Good morning. How's everyone doing this morning? Well, you've had a wonderful chance to renew friendships and feed the body, and now it's time to feed the mind. I'm John Slaughterbeck. I'm professor of history at DePauw and former chair of the history department. And it's with great pleasure and honor that I introduce my friend and colleague and fellow historian, John Baughman, who will give us a historical perspective on the occasion of Brian Casey's inauguration as DePauw's 19th president. And you will have time to ask questions following John's presentation. John is a distinguished scholar, master teacher, and loyal son of DePauw, with a half-century-long relationship with the university and with Greencastle. He enrolled at DePauw in 1942, left to serve in World War II for 2 years, receiving a Purple Heart for his service, and graduated from DePauw in 1948. He earned a master's degree at Harvard University, so you share something with our new president, and a PhD at the University of Michigan, including a year spent as a Fulbright scholar at the University of Paris. He returned to Greencastle in 1953 to teach European history, specializing in modern French history. Retiring in 1990, he was appointed university historian from 1978 to 1991. In 2003, Robert Canfield, class of 1960, and Patricia Harms Canfield, class of 1957, honored John and his wife Betty by endowing a DePauw University faculty fellowship in their name. John has also brought his skills as a historian to serve the community. As Putnam County historian, as president of the Historic Preservation Society of Putnam County, and president of the Indiana United Methodist Historical Society. He's published books, articles, and reviews on 19th century French history and on the history of Indiana. He was the co-author of DePauw, A Pictorial History, which was published in 1987, and is the author of the recently published Our Past, Their Present, Historical Essays on Putnam County, Indiana. The publication of this book by the Putnam County Museum was made possible through the generous support of DePauw University, a longtime museum partner, and I'm delighted to let you know that I brought several copies of the book with me, and John is happy to sign them, and you can purchase them after his talk. But first, John will share his insights on the history of DePauw's presidents and their role in shaping this premier liberal arts institution of higher learning. Please join me in welcoming John as he talks about the presidents of DePauw.
Thank you, John. I didn't know I was going to be an after-breakfast speaker, and some of you may be here only for the breakfast. So in the course of the next hour, if you are wanting to leave, you can go ahead and do so. It don't bother me. Okay, I appreciate your coming out to review something of our history of the presidency here at DePauw. And we decided that since age leads to garrulousness, it would probably be best if I read a prepared paper rather than just going on like a babbling brook at my age, and you would miss your lunch. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss the role of DePauw's presidents in a world that has seen much change since Indiana Asbury, now DePauw, was established in 1837. It is a work in progress, not a definitive essay. It reflects, as I see it, the ebb and flow of time and culture in our 171 years, and how the personalities and actions of our presidents fit into this picture. I seek to evaluate the 17 men, no women, who became president, with 2 caveats. I am ignoring the interim presidents, of which we have one, Rob Farber, here. and I trust he will forgive me. I feel that the interim presidents between administrations, most coming from within the faculty and staff, but whose comparatively short periods of tenure had little or no particular impact on the general history of the institution. And I'm also leaving out the presidency of Robert Bottoms, essentially because it is too recent and too familiar for us to make a valid historical evaluation. First, I want to speak of the modern colloquialism of spin. I refer to the fact that all the presidents of DePauw are spoken of frequently so highly that one need have a bit of caution. Rare sources do sometimes evidence negative characteristics and criticism. With a few exceptions, most students, when in residence, do not necessarily praise their president highly. But history and alumni generally treat them differently and with more objectivity. And usually, by the nature of the animal, the teaching faculty appear more critical of the presidents. Initially, I proposed to divide the history arbitrarily into 8 areas, each of which are denoted by a series of presidents. Next, I will make generalizations more specifically about the president's backgrounds and actions, followed by specific relationships in their tenure as president. My first era I call simply the early years, from 1837 to 1857. This is identified with the administrations of President Simpson, 9 years, Berry, 5 years, and Curry, 3 years. This is a time of beginning of small enrollment in the college, of multiple leadership functions carried out by the presidents alone, and thereby the initiation of the tone for the school through most of its early history. Secondly, I emphasize the era of Thomas Baughman, alone as president. His 14 years saw the period of confusion from the Great Civil War, after which came the initiation of the physical expansion of the campus beyond one building and a small seminary to an East College magnificent for its day. But I think even more dramatic and important for the campus was the novel introduction at that time of women and coeducation to the university. I use the term expansive period for my third consecutive distinctive era, the years 1872 to 1895. This included the presidencies of Reuben Andrus, 3 years, Alexander Martin, 14 years, and John P.D. John, 6 years. This was a time of financial ups and downs, initial weakness, then enthusiastic relief and expansion, and again, retrenchment. It was a moment of a change of name from Indiana Asbury to DePauw, and the consequent expansion of new buildings and physical plant. The enlargement of enrollment, particularly in the college. We did have a large preparatory department, and a growing state and national reputation. It was equally important as a time of curriculum change from a set, recitative, classical curriculum to a freer and widening opportunity for student choice with the arrival of the elective system. It meant expansion and experimentation with professional schools. Classroom lecturing became more prominent. This likewise included an increase in both the number of teachers with enhanced academic and professional training and specialization in subject matter. For the fourth distinctive period, I use the term church leadership from 1895 to 1924. The presidencies of Baughman, 7 years, Hughes, 6 years, McConnell, 3 years, and Gross, 12 years. Baughman had had experience directing the DePauw Theological School, and the other 3 presidents came directly from the pastoral ministry. This was an era of a changing student body, not only in numbers and origins, but also one of moving from provincialism to a new urbanity. Strong social emphases among students brought on need for discipline as well as academic strengthening. We find a consolidation of programs and curriculum, a World War I, and particularly financial improvement for the university from fund drives and the gifts of significant donors. Capping all this was the major generosity of Edward Rector for new buildings, scholarships, and endowment. The next period I refer to as the problem years, from 1925 to 1951. Of Presidents Merlin, 3 years, Oxnam, 8 years, and Wildman, 15 years. These were not problems that threatened the university so much as ones requiring steadiness in turbulent times. The university faced needed modernization after World War I, but it particularly faced a heavy national depression, affecting a need for restructuring of student body, faculty, and particularly finances. On top of that came the period of World War II, bringing unexpected change to the university, along with corresponding maturation of programs, student body, the role of women, and so forth. Finally, I conclude this resume with what, for better words, I call a period of slow growth and maturity from 1951 to 1986. The presidencies of Humbert, 11 years, Kerstetter, 12 years, and Rosser, 9 years. This may be the most provocative of my classifications because it is the most recent and the one through which most of us have lived. I see it as a period of challenge coming from cultural actions, women's liberation and civil rights as examples, the anger and frustration of the 1960s, but also a period of maintaining steady enrollment, slow faculty expansion, only mild tinkering of curriculum, and some brave academic experimentation, such as the nursing school, the winter term, DePauw overseas programs, the Center for Management and Entrepreneurship. Most significant was the financial improvement through an increased endowment and its professional management. In addition, came a spectacular development of the physical plant we see around us today. And finally, to the bottoms years from 1986 to 2008, 20 years, or 22 years, which I leave to wiser and later historians. A word on the selection process for DePauw presidents is in order. Presidential selection was by the charter always the responsibility of the Board of Trustees alone. Opening up the selection process came for the first time in 1936 at the close of a controversial relationship period between President Oxnam and his faculty. The trustees created a search committee which included a faculty member, who in turn canvassed the teaching faculty for its input. For Humbert in 1951, the trustees were aided by an appointed faculty committee. For Kerstetter, in 1962, the board relied on advice from a joint faculty trustee committee. By 1977, this had been widened to include trustees, faculty, alumni, and students. However, in 1986, the board simply named popular Vice President Robert Bottoms to the presidential office. I want to make some generalizations now with specific examples of the backgrounds of the men elected president of Indiana, Asbury, and DePauw. All presidents, with 4 exceptions, were born and raised in the mid-Atlantic states and the eastern part of the Midwest. These exceptions were Lucien Berry, born in Vermont, though raised in Ohio; Alexander Martin, born in Nairn, Scotland, and coming to Pennsylvania with his parents in his adolescent years. He always, here at DePauw, spoke with a Scottish brogue. G. Bromley Oxnam was our only president born west of Indiana, who hailed from Southern California. And of course, Robert Bottoms came from Alabama in the Deep South. All the presidents were born to modest families with parental backgrounds essentially in farming, small business, the professions. None of the presidents seemingly enjoyed wealth at the time they were here, with the exception of Oxnam, whose wife was reputed to be moneyed. Awkward in the era of the Great Depression in Greencastle. One, Kerstetter, may have come from a family of little wealth, since he lost his father, a Pennsylvania coal miner, at the age of 6 in 1919. Simpson, too, lost his father at the time of President Simpson's birth. The academic preparations of these presidents are worth noting. All attended some college, but 3 in the 19th century did not graduate. Simpson at Madison College, quickly defunct, Berry at Miami of Ohio, and President John at Brookville College, now disappeared. All of the rest of them had Bachelors of Arts degrees, except for Humbert, with a Bachelor of Science. 4 graduated from Ohio Wesleyan: Hughes, McConnell, Gross, and Rosser. 2 from Dickinson: Baughman and Kerstetter. 2 from DePauw: Merlin and Wildman. 1 from Indiana Asbury, the predecessor of DePauw, Gobin. And the remaining from Wesleyan, Curry, McKendree, Andrus, Allegheny, Martin, Southern California, Oxnam, and Worcester, Humbert. 11 had an advanced degree beyond a bachelor's. 7 of these with the Bachelor of Sacred Theology, all from Methodist Boston University: Hughes, McConnell, Gross, Oxnam, Wildman, Humbert, Kerstetter. And 1 had a STB, Bachelor of Sacred Theology, from his alma mater, DePauw. That was President Merlin. Only 4 of our presidents of the 17 presidents, had earned PhDs. 3 of them from Boston University: McConnell, Wildman, and Kerstetter. And 1 from Syracuse, Rosser. Notice all advanced earned degrees were, and this includes the STBs, All advanced earned degrees were received from Methodist-affiliated colleges and universities. Most recent presidents had honorary doctorates, entitling them to the designation doctor. We might ask, what of their experience before coming to the presidency of DePauw? All had experience as pastors of Methodist churches or Methodist charges, especially in their immediate post-college years. All were ordained Methodist clergy, with the exception of Rosser, who was a Methodist layman. Of equal importance, most had taught either at a rudimentary primary level, Baughman, secondary level, Andrus, or at the university or graduate school level, Simpson, Gobin, Martin, John, interestingly in mathematics, Oxnam, Weilman, Kerstetter, and Rosser. A goodly number had had school and college administrative experience before coming to DePauw. Curry had been principal of an academy, Andrus as director of a preparatory department at Illinois Wesleyan, Rosser as dean of Albion, and others were college presidents. Martin was the first president of the University of West Virginia. John was president of Moores Hill, now the University of Evansville. Gobin was president of Baker. Merlin also at Baker, and 13 years as president of Boston University. Kerstetter had been president at Simpson College. 4 had never taught or been a school administrator before coming to DePauw: Hughes, McConnell, Gross, and Humbert. 3 others had interesting occupational backgrounds, if not particularly pertinent to the presidency. Simpson studied and practiced medicine. Baughman had studied law, and Martin, as a young lad, was apprenticed to a tanner and practiced that occupation for 3 years. Finally, a few additional items about the president's persons. All but one, Curry, was married. All the rest had children except the Merlins. Indeed, Baughman was the most prolific, with 8 sons and 3 daughters. Only one president died in office, Humbert. Every president knew East College, except for Berry, who died before it was built. All were fairly young when called to the office. The youngest was the first president, Simpson, who was 28. 3 others were in their mid-30s: Oxnam, 36, Hughes, 37, McConnell, 38. Merlin was the oldest at 63, and admittedly in poor health. What did they do after leaving the presidency, since many were still fairly young? 6 of 17 became Methodist bishops, 5 directly from the presidential office: Simpson, Baughman, Hughes, McConnell, Gross, Oxnam. 3 continued as teaching faculty: 2 at DePauw, Martin and Gobin, and Weilman for a short time at Southern Methodist and Dickinson. Curry became editor of important Methodist publications. 1 became another college president, Berry of Iowa Wesleyan. Andrus became a prominent pastor and later farmer. 1 a professional lecturer, John. 1 the pastor of the American Church in Berlin, Merlin. And 1 the president of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, essentially a lobbyist, Rosser. Only 1 took up no later regular work, Kerstetter. One could suspect that by the late 20th century, presidential salaries were such that presidents could retire with adequate income. 8 presidents were buried in Greencastle: Baughman, Martin, John, Goeben, Hughes, Gross, Wildman, and Humbert. Of local memorials to presidents, 2 had streets named after them in Greencastle: Simpson and Berry. One had a gymnasium replaced by a park, Baughman. One had a church, Goeben Memorial United Methodist Church, and one a dormitory, Humbert. So much for general characteristics of the presidents. I turn next to what I see as major relationships of the presidents with the university governance. Initially, I wish to emphasize their relationship to the Methodist Church. Indiana Asbury University was founded by the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1837, whose elected Board of Trustees came essentially from Indiana Methodist clergy, prominent Methodist laymen, and occasional Greencastle civic leaders. In 1968, under President Kerstetter, the board agreed to revise the bylaws, reducing total membership from then 44 to 33. 9, including the Indiana bishop, were elected by the 2 Indiana conferences of the United Methodist Church, 8 by the alumni, and the remaining 16 by the Board of Trustees itself. This officially closed out Methodist control of DePauw University. I need to repeat, up through Kerstetter, all presidents were ordained Methodist clergy with some pastoral responsibilities before their presidency. One should note that as the Methodist Church increased its educational requirements for its ordained clergy, so the academic training and administrative and teaching experiences of the presidents of DePauw increased, as previously discussed. All the presidents of DePauw gave evidence at the university of piety and strong support for continuing Christian and Methodist influence on the university and for close relationships with the church. But even with their Methodist connections, all presidents practiced a vigorous academic support for the liberal arts base of the university and rejected any detrimental Methodist influence in the operations of the university, particularly academic interference. The stereotypical caricature of Protestant religious extremism or fundamentalism attributed to some Methodist clergy was always missing among our presidents. The presidents remained ever on the side of mainline Orthodox Methodist philosophy, theology, and persuasion. One might even characterize them as probably closet liberals. Oxnam, in the 20th century, was the best-known outspoken exponent of any radicalism while at the university. Until fairly recent times, DePauw presidents were active in state and national leadership of the Methodist Church, which in the 19th and early 20th century gave DePauw national recognition in the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. Of course, the main job of the university president was as an administrator. In the area of management skills, virtually all presidents reflected either the simplicity or the complexity of their times. In the early days, this trust was the chief responsibility of the president in a school of modest enrollment and endowment. But by the end of the 19th century, there developed a more formal separation of the operations of academic administration from financial administration. Likewise, in the 20th century, gradually outsourcing of academic tasks by presidents came in the appointment of new administrative leaders, deans, assistant deans, directors, academic department heads, and so forth. Presidents often became coordinators of men and women, many not holding academic positions, who had a variety of responsibilities, such as athletics, libraries, dining rooms, and so forth. And consequently, as the university size grew, there came an increasing hierarchy of personnel and staff. At the same time, the presidents maintained overall leadership in the raising of university finances from donors who expected and received more presidential attention in return. Leadership of the teaching faculty and staff always remained an administrative responsibility of the presidents. However, the bylaws left to the faculty the major responsibility for determining curriculum. Whenever presidents seemed to move more directly into this area beyond mere suggestions for change, they were promptly criticized and often thwarted by a faculty jealous of its own prerogatives within the structure of the university. This frequently frustrated significant donors who expected their voices to be heard. The first 8 presidents had regular teaching responsibilities, normally assigned work with seniors in a capstone course as professors of mental and moral philosophy. President Baughman was the last president to be found regularly in the classroom. Only 2, John and Baughman, were ever advanced from the teaching faculty to the presidency, and hence both immensely popular with the then current student body. 2 presidents continued on the teaching faculty after their retirement, Martin and Baughman, with some influence as elder statesmen. Faculty were generally small in number for most of the 19th century, and faculty relations with the presidents were reasonably good. However, financial restrictions and continuing deficits and fluctuations in the pay scale meant that at times the university was essentially financed by its cheap faculty. Perhaps this was why the faculty was always reasonably young, and they were often ordained, allowing for moonlighting among county churches. However, membership in the Methodist Church was never required of faculty or staff, though highly encouraged. There was evidence of some faculty dissension with the short administration of Andrus, which was inherited by a forceful President Martin. In 1879, the board, with the president's endorsement, restructured the faculty by asking all of them to resign. And 3 resignations from the most popular and long-term teachers were accepted for unknown reasons. Martin proceeded to build a strong young faculty, which was always also probably economically more reasonable. The most serious crisis ever between faculty and president came with President Oxnam. Early in 1930, he sought to increase administrative centralization by arbitrarily undertaking a complete reorganization of the faculty and the elimination of departments. He removed the faculty as the supreme authority in educational matters, replacing its leadership with a small coterie of faculty favorites. An overwhelming majority of the faculty voted to restore the farmer organization, and in 1935, Oxenham relented and asked the board to reinstate the farmer faculty powers. Again, in 1933, he refused to recognize faculty tenure, fired a respected but rather tactless professor and critic of the art administration. The result was the American Association of University Professors criticized him publicly for lack of substantial evidence, lack of a hearing process, and unchecked authority in tenure matters. The AAUP passed a motion of censorship of DePauw University in 1934. In 1935, Oxenham was elected a bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church, being persuaded to accept by his friend, the director of the music school, Dean Robert McCutcheon, Oxenham's successor, Wildman, an experienced college professor of religion, ameliorated the faculty and introduced new faculty support committees. From Wildman on to the present, the presidents have maintained reasonably good relations with the faculty by recognizing faculty responsibility for academic programming and curriculum decisions, and by supporting the increase of the faculty pay scale and such perks as faculty development grants, reduction of class contact hours, and developing a policy of smaller classes and seminars. There was, however, some rumbling over the importance of student evaluations of teaching faculty introduced by President Rosser. Another major area of presidential activity came with managing university finances. All presidents before the mid-20th century faced financial crises, some very serious. DePauw financing was always precarious, and all presidents had to juggle operations dependent on limited funding. Until there was a large endowment to fall back on, the university relied on the Methodist Church, donors with sizable gifts, some tuition income, and an occasional fund drive among Methodists, Hoosiers, and Greencastle citizens. Not until 1855 was the first reported audit, and the early presidents managed hit or miss with frequent deficits. President Baughman, however, was helped by cost-cutting during the Civil War and even had some small surpluses, followed by several post-war large gifts. But this was temporary, since a major depression in the 1870s caught the university unprepared, and there was talk of the university shutting. Rescue came under the astute management by President Martin, and the enticement in 1884 of a major Methodist layman and rich entrepreneur, Washington C. DePauw, to provide money and matching gifts for a name change with big ideas of expansion to a true university with graduate professional schools, law, theology, pedagogy, music, and so forth. But this generous support crashed when DePauw himself died prematurely and unexpectedly in 1887, leaving a contested will and a university facing the national financial panic of 1893. This meant enrollment decline, closing of the professional schools, and the possible demise again of the entire university in the 1890s. Belt tightening, new funding drives, and the appointment of a chancellor to relieve presidents, John, in particular Baughman, of some administrative financial responsibility led to survival in the 20th century. Successful fund drives under the first four presidents of that century, Baughman through Gross, particularly with generous gifts from large donors, especially Edward Rector, restored financial solvency. However, the late 20s, with the Great Depression and sloppy investments, brought economic crisis again. This was partially resolved by improved financial management and assertion by the Board of Trustees of introducing modern financial management techniques. This was succeeded by successful financial management by President Baughman in World War II with the United States naval programs. It is, however, in the period of the last 50 years that the board's selection of presidents known for money raising that resulted in a public sense of financial security with a sizable and successful enlargement in endowment. However, this also resulted in presidential academic leadership often being delegated to others, while the efforts of presidents frequently turned to public relations and money raising. We note here such successful drives as the Greater DePauw Program, the Design for a Decade, and the annual Alumni Fund. The number of financially successful DePauw alumni who were generous, plus the university's willingness to accept federal financial assistance and seeking out foundation grants, improved the financial outlook for DePauw and enhanced the president's reputations. I would never be forgiven if I left out the relationship of the presidents to the student body. Generally, students and presidents got along well, and some were extraordinarily popular, like John and Gobin. One particularly unforgotten incident and the nadir of student-president relations came with the presidency of Curry from 1854 to 1857. The president, along with some faculty, changed the weekly meeting times of the important literary societies from Friday evening to Friday afternoons. Most of the student enrollment, numbering about 230, rebelled, and despite negotiations, the president held fast against about 100 who met and agreed to stick together. An ultimatum came forth for all students to pledge within 24 hours not to oppose the administration. 19 agreed, 81 refused, 19 wanted more time, and 9 ducked voting. Curry then suspended the entire senior class. 6 of 8 juniors, 8 sophomores, 12 freshmen, and 29 scientifics are part-timers. No class graduated from Indiana Asbury at the commencement of 1857. Curry resigned the following summer, as did some of his favored faculty. There's also some evidence of student dissension in the Andrus period, poorly documented. The most favored president by students was probably John, whose popularity and modern ideas did initiate some board disfavor, and he too had his resignation accepted. The students were not all that fond of Merlin, mainly because of his age and to them apparent decrepitude. However, they little gave him credit for his defiance. At 63, he wasn't building a resume. His defiance of both church and the establishment in order to bring changes now considered favorable to the modernization of DePauw student life in the late 20s, such items as introducing dancing, or permission of dancing. Because of his youth, exceptional popular speaking ability in addressing students, and his general vocal opposition to conservative national forces, Oxnam received very favorable student ratings. From Wildman on, recent presidents on a much larger campus seem to be neither popular or unpopular with students as a whole, although, of course, they developed, these presidents, good relations with individual students. Finally, I want to mention the responsibilities of the university presidents to off-campus entities. As for Greencastle and Putnam County, by and large, presidents and university entertained good relations. The worst episode came during the presidency of Berry. Being a noted Whig at a time when most Indiana Methodists and the citizens of Greencastle were Democrats, including his predecessor, First President Simpson, this was held against him. In 1853, Berry expelled a student associated with a riot when a black resident was driven from town. The father of the student aroused the town's citizens against Berry. Again, Berry tried to refuse permission to students who lived in the same rooming houses with the local grocer's clerks suspected of selling them liquor. Landladies and most of the town rebelled against Berry. Although acceptable to students, board, and faculty, a harassed Berry resigned a year later. Ever after, presidents, with a few exceptions like Oxnam, have shown reluctance to display their political persuasions publicly. Against that moment, we should state that several presidents were particularly popular with Greencastle citizenry. Noteworthy were Goban and Humbert. As for state and national reputations, the presidents have all been well known, particularly in Indiana. Especially were those who preached well and cultivated state Methodists and other generous supporters for money. Their presence and influence on the national scene in Methodist and some educational circles helped promote the university. Four who were particularly well known after their presidencies were Simpson, Baughman, John, McConnell, and Oxnam. And certainly in the 20th and 21st centuries, presidents seemed immensely popular with the alumni, who were never allowed to forget the existence of DePauw presidents through extensive school publications and the ever rounds of meetings of alumni groups. What conclusion can I provide for this talk? Each DePauw president was different from the other, but all had much the same responsibilities, increasingly complex as time marched on. All were ever reminded of their responsibility to the Board of Trustees, essentially Methodist until 1968. But by being directly on the scene of action of the university, all were significant in setting directions for the university, either overtly or covertly. All seem molded by their religious faith, the Methodist denomination within Protestantism. Most had forceful personalities, making friends and enemies. 5 characteristics I would submit seem to come together for a successful DePauw presidency: personality, eloquence, intellectuality, leadership skills, and administrative ability. When all of these were combined in one person, they made for very effective presidents, and DePauw blossomed. When any deficiencies in the presidents appeared in any of these characteristics, it reduced their overall effectiveness. But indeed, we have been fortunate in these 17, now 19 men.
Well, I'm sure you're glad to know John saved time for some questions. So.
Comments.
Or comments.
Oh, no, you, yes, Ken.
I'll ask you one, John. I had just recently realized, and I probably should have known this from my student days, that President Simpson went on to eulogize Abraham Lincoln. Was he the most public, nationally known former president of DePauw? Was he the
could be. I think we make more out of the fact that Simpson did this. He, at times, was a prominent Methodist bishop. And if you realize, in those days, Methodist bishops were bishops of the whole country. They weren't limited to a geographical area. So Simpson was frequently in Washington and had met with Lincoln. Now, Lincoln was not necessarily, he was religious, but not denominationally. But he had these meetings with Simpson. And what went on, who knows? But Simpson was asked in Springfield to be one of those who gave a eulogy for the president. Simpson was particularly influential in the country at that time. He was an ultra-patriotic and ultra-union supporter. And his talks in this sense influenced the national government. That is, they were pleased to have a Methodist bishop as they're supporting their cause. He was particularly intimate with Mary Lincoln after the president's death, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, was frequently with Mrs. Lincoln and her family and so forth. Another interesting thing, as you may know, a DePauw graduate married Abraham Lincoln's eldest son, Robert Lincoln. And so a Greencastle DePauw, not DePauw graduate, but was, let us say, the Greencastle citizen, a woman, married a governor or a DePauw graduate, Senator Harlan, and their son or their daughter married Robert Lincoln. So if you've ever visited the Robert Lincoln's home up, I believe, in New Hampshire, on the sideboard you will see pictures of this Greencastle resident. But as far as I know, she never came back to Greencastle after she once lived. But yes, Simpson was very well known, particularly in national circles. I should have mentioned it perhaps as one of the better known. Maybe I did. Yes, sir.
Yeah, previously you mentioned that they were involved in politics previously, and Simpson, I thought you said was a Democrat.
Yes. No, he was a Democrat, yes.
Yeah, so how was it that he drifted toward Lincoln? Lincoln was a Republican.
Yeah, I know. Well, of course, this, I don't know. I think you have to be sensitive to when this school was begun. The Methodist clergy were generally not college educated. Very rarely was anyone of the clergy associated with Methodism. The old circuit riders, they were intelligent, they knew their Bible, they knew their Wesley, but they were not classically educated. And therefore, many in the state of the better classes looked down on the Democrats. And the Methodists generally turned toward the old Democrats. This is the period. Remember, Martin Van Buren was the President of the United States when our Constitution, when DePauw was created. So we're going back to the Jacksonian period. And that makes a lot of difference. We go along with the nation, in a sense. There isn't a recent biography of Simpson. There are some old-time ones, generally biased. Chris?
You touched on this, but were there particular or significant points or presidencies when the university's relationship to the Methodist Church changed?
Were there significant presidents?
Were there particular times when the university's relationship with the church changed?
Well, they did in the toward the end of the 20th century. It was a slow. I still think it's a separation rather than a divorce, but it is so doggone close. When I asked the president's office, since I had found nothing in the mission statements that implied that we had any connection ever with the Methodists, and there's nothing in the catalog, which I was informed was online, so I couldn't read it. I asked the President's office, are we church related? And the President's office said, oh, yes, yes, yes. We are accredited by the Methodist University Senate, which is a group of influential Methodist educators who meet and pass accreditation on colleges. We were last accredited in 2000. Next year, the accrediting agencies will be here from the United Methodist Church. Whether they accept our present situation or not remains to be seen. I suspect they will, simply because we are influential and big enough and can wield our influence. But whether in reality this is so, I leave to all of you who are here. Yes, Bob?
I want to tell one humorous example. Having worked off with 5 of these presidents, I have lots of them. But this question I thought might be interesting. I know you've heard it before. Several of the board members, 3 of them said, Baughman, every member of the history department are Democrats. Now, we don't think they ought to be all Republicans, but wouldn't it be more fair to say that 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats? So I went to George Manhart, and something here. I went to George Manhart. He was chairman of his committee, the department then. And I said, well, that's a reasonable thing, isn't it? What do you think of that? Well, he said, well, anybody who reads would be a Democrat. That was the end of that conversation. We had individual ones. Frequently in Vietnam Revolution, people say, we demand today that you fire so-and-so. They're still living, so I want to use their name. He had the flag upside down, firing. I was able to say, look, I'm a veteran too, and there isn't any rule that says how you have to do that, so I can't do it. So I have a lot of those little things.
Well, Oxenham had particular problems because he was a pacifist, and he had a number of the faculty who had fought in the First World War and were veterans, members of the American Legion and so forth. And consequently, that is one, I suspect, reason Oxenham and these faculty had some disagreements. Some of you, Al, you've heard the stories probably somewhat. This is Professor Crandall's son. Yes, you've heard them. Yes.
Let me tell one more Royal West story. We had a professor named Bundy who was told, I don't know, I didn't read the book, but his book on the life of Jesus, they said somebody raised a question about how Jesus was born. And somebody in the Methodist Church said, firing anybody who questions how Jesus was born doesn't deserve to be on that. And the chairman of the board was Roy O. West. And Roy O. West stood up and said, this, by bylaw, the faculty determines the curriculum and the teaching, and we're not going to fire. So we all thought that he struck a blow for academic freedom.
Neil?
John, you mentioned President Oxenham and his pacifism and his outspokenness. Were there other presidents who spoke out on the major issues of the time, such as the various wars or about social justice at the time of the Depression or the Civil Rights Movement? And did presidents take stands, even on campus, and perhaps more broadly?
I think if you recognize their Methodist Christian base, they were naturally on the side of civil rights movements and things of this sort. I don't know of any specific instances. Back in the 19th century, they got very excited. We'd have presidential candidates come to the campus, or not to the town, and some presidents would deny the fact that the students couldn't go there. It was controversial. It depends on the persuasion of the particular candidate. But on the other hand, there were others that accepted, whether that was personal or not. I remember in one of Kerstetter's moments when there was a group in front of Asbury Hall demanding that the president sign some liberal statement. I don't remember the details. And the whole group was, you know, we want this, and President Kerstetter said he'd already signed it sometime before they brought up the subject. So, you know, sometimes presidents can outwit the students who think they are more liberal than all the rest of us.
Okay, well, I know this is a very busy day for everyone. I want to thank you all for coming and for staying, and to thank John again for a very illuminating talk on the cause past. John has agreed to stay for a few minutes if you wish to purchase a copy of his latest book, and he'll be happy to personally autograph it for you.